So you're talking about long-term solutions. What are they in your mind?
Well, we don't have the solutions. Our concern is the welfare of the drivers.
Of course, but do you have? I mean, drivers must talk about what they think the solution would be. What is your view on that?
Well, our view is what we've been also campaigning for is the deployment of more security personnel, mainly perhaps the French military, to help the existing security personnel who are already in Calais, who quite clearly can't cope with the problem that's going on as it is, and it's surely going to escalate now with the dismantling of the camp.
We've had a few tweets coming in. And F. Reed in New Jersey has tweeted, why do migrants have such disdain for France? None want to apply for asylum there. It seems the UK is the holy grail. Why is that? Bram, come back in on this, Bram Wanroy. Rhys Williams again there talking about security. And, F. Reed tweeting there about the idea of the UK being the holy grail. That is essentially the problem, isn't it? You've got lots of people who want to come to the UK and not a safe way to get there currently. So what is the solution to that?
Well, there's two things I want to say about that, really. I mean, there's not that many people wanting to go to the UK. There's actually less than 1% of all the migrants coming into Europe in 2015 ended up in Calais. So it really isn't that big a number. That is not to underestimate the actual challenge there, of course. On the other hand, you do have the challenge of, and that's a contradiction of so many people wanting to make that journey and no safe passage being granted to any of them. This is a problem that we see in the Mediterranean area. It's a problem we see over land on the Balkans route, and we're seeing it now here. So that is something that needs an EU-wide approach, and that is precisely the thing that has been lacking. We need an EU-wide approach. We need some sort of system in which different countries are encouraged to take a certain number of people, percentage-wise. That has been talked about. It hasn't really been implemented yet. The whole European infrastructure for migration has collapsed under the weight of the numbers that have come in since 2015. So we really need a Europe-wide approach, a Marshall Plan type operation, say.
And individual countries having their own strategy, which appears to be what they're doing right now. Bram Wanroy, thank you for speaking with us. Thank you also to Rhys Williams. We heard from him earlier on, Operations Manager Association here in the UK. You're listening to World Have You Say. We've got about 10 minutes of the programme left, and we're going to talk about a story which many of you are discussing online. In fact, you're having a conversation about it on our Facebook page as we speak. Should children head footballs? It's a conversation that was started after researchers in Scotland at the University of Stirling carried out a study where players headed the ball 20 times. It's the sort of thing that a professional footballer would do in a normal training session. And between 41% and 67%. It only lasted for 24 hours, but of course the question is, if you're doing it every day, does that mean you constantly have a problem with your short-term memory? Let's speak to Dr. Jess Schwartz, who is the Programme Director for Evidence in Motion, the world's first concussion education programme for clinicians, speaking to us from New York. Dr. Schwartz, thank you for coming on to World Have Your Say. What do you make of this study? Would you agree with it?
Absolutely. Hi, and thank you for having me. I have to say, it's an honor to talk to you across the pond. And, Willie Stewart and all put this together, and it's fantastic because basically the clinicians that are troops on the ground trying to disseminate this information to families and coaches and communities now have a little bit of data to kind of talk to and speak with that to get that knowledge translation across. Here in the U.S., we have, newly implemented guidelines by U.S. Soccer, basically saying that we can't be heading into game for youth 13 and under. So I think it's a wonderful way to start the conversation. And no, just point blank is children should not be heading a ball under 13 years old.
What about
in a game situation? And
what about professional footballers?
Adults are a different animal. I think with proper technique and training, which we need to implement from a young age, I think that's a different animal. Also, adults also have the choice to choose, the option to choose, and we call that informed consent over here in the States. And adults that ability to put things together for their long-term brain health. So I think avoiding repetitive head injury, especially in a pediatric age group, I think is very important. So it's really wonderful to see this get done.
Dr. Schwartz, let me introduce you to a couple of other guests we have with us. Dr. Rosemary Mauser is a neuropsychologist and author of Ahead of the Game, The Parent's Guide to Youth Sports Concussion, joining us from New Jersey. And also Darren Holloway, who is in County Durham, which is in the north of England. He's a former professional footballer with clubs such as Sunderland and Wimbledon and is now a coach at Middlesbrough Academy. Darren, listening to Dr. Schwartz, do you agree that young kids simply should not head the ball?
No, I don't. Simply because I think there's furthermore studies I think need to be done to get us to a conclusive area of what we need to be doing. But what the doctor did touch on is people learning and practicing the correct techniques. Now, those techniques will probably need to be learnt at an age where they pick things up and get in good habits. Now, we see in academies children not being able to head the ball correctly using wrong techniques. So, in my view, I think the heading from younger ages has definitely been limited, and I think we do something in grassroots football here from a younger age where we actually get goalkeepers now instead of doing goal kicks and kicking out the hands. The opposition team retreat to the halfway line, and that was it was basically to encourage youngsters to play more football, to encourage them to pass the ball more. So in that sense, in that essence, we've probably limited the time youngsters spend heading the ball through that. But I do think it's an interesting point, which obviously needs a bit more in-depth studies.
I want to bring in Dr. Moser to speak to you as well. We heard both Jess and Darren there talking about heading the ball correctly. Would you agree there's a way to minimise the risk?
I don't know that we have evidence to show that. And what we do find is that you can't always control how you head the ball. But especially with youngsters whose brains are still developing, we really don't know what the consequences are. There is some research, especially with adults and older athletes, that subconcussive blows can result in brain changes. And indeed, our research, which we're also doing now with the 10 to 12-year-old younger population, shows that even in individuals who've had any concussion at all, there are subtle differences in their symptoms normally, even if they're feeling fine. So I think we have to be very careful about that. I know, we're thinking about, well, as you know, here in the States, there's a ban under the age of 12. There's no heading. And I think there's a good reason for that. We just have to be careful in terms of how we interpret these.
Don't head the ball.
It's a difficult one from my point of view. I think children these days are learning different techniques of other aspects of the game, even more so now than what they did probably when I grew up. When I grew up, heading was very important, and it was something that we learned at a younger age. I think this day and age, techniques of passing and skills probably come more to the front of people thinking of practicing. So, in essence, I think children are probably not doing as much heading as they did many years ago.
Dr. Schwartz, isn't there a danger that we're just wrapping kids up in cotton wool? Kids are forever falling over, banging their heads. It's kind of life. And in reality, is a child in a practice going to head the ball 20 times, which is what happened in this study? Probably not, because they haven't got the technique.
Well, it's actually not true. We're actually seeing cumulative exposure to concussion and subconcussive hits. From age 5, we have kids here playing American football and U.S. soccer, playing from age 5, and they're playing on club teams and multiple teams and recreation leagues. So they're not only practicing 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 times per week, but all of those things add up. which is why we're trying to standardize this across the board. Now, if we look at cumulative head exposure, we're looking at repetitive head trauma associated with smaller brain volumes from your thalamus and hypothalamus. And that's basically how we function and move and think and interact with our environments and our personal and social lives. So the fact that we can somehow reduce this from a standardized way, I think is huge, because we've got to keep people moving and kids moving. You know, according to the CDC and Public Health in England, both in the US and in England, 31% of kids are obese or overweight. So we've got to keep them moving, but we've got to keep them safe. And with information, we can do that.
It's interesting as we talk. I'm just watching. We've got loads of TV screens here in the World Heavyweight Studios. You can imagine watching different news feeds from around the world. And I've just seen the former England captain Gary Lineker was tweeting earlier today saying he never headed a ball in training because he thought it might be damaging. Darren, did you ever hear anything when you were a professional footballer about this?
No, I'd never come across anything like that in training or games. It was always something that we practice and learn to do properly, and I think that's very key. You learn to do it properly, and you learn to do it properly from practicing at possibly a young age anyway.
Did you ever notice anything yourself with your memory?
I think close friends and family would tell you that my memory hasn't been the greatest, full stop. So in that sense, I can't really give a call on my situation.
But I guess the thing is, it's this cumulative effect, isn't it? If it's saying that if you head the ball, it lasts for, a short-term memory loss can last for 24 hours. If you're heading the ball every day, does that mean your memory is affected every day? I mean, it would seem to suggest yes, from what you've just said.
I'd honestly think that during a game of football, defenders probably wouldn't head the ball the amount of times that's been mentioned in the case study, and I think it's really important to go on and find out more about this and have more studies into it.
And I think
and then we can make a conscious decision of where we need to go with possibly limitations with the children.
And that's exactly what they're saying, Darren, that they want to do. They want to see if there are long-term consequences on brain health. It's something they're yet to investigate. Michael on Facebook says, in the not-too-distant future, I expect to see children in plastic germ-free bubbles or suits where they're not allowed to do anything. Thanks for all of your contributions today. Tune in again tomorrow.
John Sopel clarifies, quantifies, and amplifies all you need to know about the U.S. elections.
You know what? The word that has become the most overused covering this election campaign is unprecedented, because every week, every day, something seems to happen that is unprecedented. What joy it is to be alive, to be covering such an amazing hit.
The Sopel Soapbox at bbcworldservice.com/podcasts. Finding your favorite radio station on DRM is easy. Search by frequency, station name, or even type of program. DRM, International Radio in the Digital Age.
The BBC and Digital Radio.
It's 17 hours GMT. I'm Jackie Leonard. This is the newsroom from the BBC World Service. The French authorities say much progress has been made in the operation to close the migrant camp in Calais known as the Jungle. Not all are willing to leave.
I'm waiting for the UK, I go to the UK. All people is living in the jungle. Is waiting 2 years, 15 months, 18 months to go to the UK. Everything is there.
A free trade deal between the EU and Canada has been blocked by the objections of 3 regions of Belgium. They say they're not opposed to the idea of a deal.
But we don't want this to be against our social and ecological standards. We don't want a mechanism of arbitration which enables multinational corporations to attack the state.
A risky decision for a pregnant mother.
If we didn't choose the option of emergency surgery that night, that within a day or so she would pass.
And a remarkable medical success story. Also, and somewhat belatedly, writing credits for Shakespeare's service in London.
I'm Stuart McIntosh with the BBC News. Hello. Belgium says it's not in a position to support the free trade deal between Canada and the European Union because socialist leaders cannot give their backing to meet today's deadline. Socialist-led constituencies in Belgium want more time to study the text of the agreement.